Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are calling in from in the world this morning. My name is Julie Kaler, and I am the Gaia Activity Director. I'm a white woman wearing a tan turtleneck sweater with glasses and brown curly hair, sitting in my home office. I'd like to welcome you all to this webinar, where we will be sharing our latest resource that outlines key recommendations, strategies, and tools to address challenges identified by Gaia's recent gender and youth integration research. In addition to sharing Gaia's evidence-based recommendations, we also have 4 implementers with us to share concrete examples of how they have incorporated these recommendations into their work. We will introduce them later on, but we wanted to say now that we are delighted to have these implementers here to share their experiences with us. So before we get started, we'd like to inform you that the session will be recorded and that we are providing simultaneous interpretation in French, Spanish, and Arabic. So I'd like to invite everybody to select their preferred language for this session. You can do so by clicking the interpretation icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen and selecting your preferred language. You can choose to mute the original audio or listen to it at a lower volume. So our slides will be presented in English, so you all know. At any time during the event, if you have questions or comments, please use the chat box feature. We do have team members who are tracking the chat, and we will be able to provide responses immediately. So please put your questions in the chat. And again, pick your language in Zoom interpretation, and we'll get ready to go. So today's webinar is brought to you by the Gender and Youth Activity, or Gaia, which is a USAID Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance, or BHA, funded learning award that works to improve the quality and impact of food security activities. We do this by addressing the barriers and challenges implementing partners face when integrating gender and youth into their activities. Gaia is a 5-year award, and we're in the midst of our 2nd year. And our team sits across both Mercy Corps and Save the Children. If you want to learn more about Gaia, we have a link there in the chat that you're welcome to go to on the FSN network. So we are very excited to share that this event will conclude with the unveiling of a graphic recording. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with graphic recording, let me explain it for you real quick. So we have Lisa Sorsa on the line today from ThinkLink Graphics, who will be capturing today's conversation, the ideas we've discussed, and key themes in a drawing in real time. So during the last few minutes of this event, we'll share that image back with you. So this graphic is going to serve hopefully as a resource that can synthesize today's conversation that you can look back on in addition to the recording in order to aid you in your work to advance gender and youth integration in your programs. So to give you an example, this is a graphic produced by Lisa's team for the Women in Development Tapestry series. So this is similar to what we will have at the end of our event, thanks to Lisa and team today. So very excited. So I'd like to now pass the floor to my colleague, Hope Shaken, who will take a little bit of time to talk about the purpose of this research that Gaia is sharing with you today. Over to you, Hope.
Thanks, Julie. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Hope Shaken. I am the Technical Officer for Research and Learning on Gaia. I'm a white woman in my early 30s, wearing a blue long sleeve shirt and a scarf, and I have brown hair. So today I'm going to briefly introduce the research that Gaia conducted and the products that we are here to introduce to you today. So in 2022, Gaia conducted formative research in partnership with Sayara International to better understand how implementing partners are incorporating the needs of different gender groups and young people in their programming. The primary audience for this research was BHA-funded implementers working on emergency programs or on resilience food security activities, also known as RFSAs. So 635 respondents from 40 countries completed Gaia's survey, which asked people to self-identify their strengths and also their areas for improvement related to their knowledge, attitudes, and practices associated with gender and youth integration. Gaia then conducted qualitative data collection with 50 representatives from implementing partner organizations around the world to better understand the context behind the data and to get recommendations on what we, the Gaia team, could do to address existing gaps. So based on this research, Gaia published 2 key researches, which we are thrilled to share with you today. The first is a guidance note or evidence brief for implementing partners on gender and youth integration based on the results of Gaia's research. And it's entitled Gender and Youth Insights for Integration and Implementation, an Evidence-Based Guide to Action. This is the main document or output that we will be discussing in today's webinar and sharing with you. The second output is a research report authored by Sayara International, which presents the findings of the research and provides recommendations for Gaia, which we have incorporated into our work planning and activity designs. So I'd love to take this opportunity now to tell you a bit more about our guidance note, Gender and Youth Insights for Integration and Implementation, and how to use it. So this guidance note or evidence brief provides 3 evidence-based recommendations for implementing partners based on insights from Gaia's recent research. Each recommendation then lists practical actions that implementing partners can take to incorporate Gaia's recommendations into their work, and then links to resources to support that integration of those actions into programs. So my colleague Katie just shared a link to the English version of the guidance note in the chat. Versions are also available in Arabic, French, Spanish, Amharic, Oromo, and Bengali, which we'll find linked on the page that Katie shared. So I'm sure by now many of you are wondering, what are the recommendations in our guidance note? To explain, I'm going to pass things over to my colleague, Emily.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Emily Tierink, and I'm the program officer on the Gaia program. I'm a white woman with brown hair and pink glasses. I'm wearing a pink jacket and sitting in my home office. Today, I'm excited to share with all of you Gaia's main research findings and accompanying recommendations. After each finding, we'll have the chance to hear examples of what these recommendations look like in practice from our implementing partners. Throughout today's webinar, we also want to hear from all of you. We have a couple of questions for you later on, but please feel free to put questions or comments in the chat at any time. So let's dive into Gaia's research findings. Through our research, Gaia found that the lack of buy-in or knowledge from management and technical sector experts around gender and youth integration is a key barrier to change at the organizational level. To address this barrier, Gaia's first recommendation is to enlist senior management and a range of technical sector leads as champions of positive youth development and gender equality. Specifically, Gaia found that management does not prioritize positive youth development and gender equality. In our research, only 58% of survey respondents strongly agreed that management in their organizations always takes gender equality seriously. Secondly, the research showed that most technical sector experts do not feel responsible for mainstreaming positive youth development and gender equality. Gender and youth experts stated that other technical sector experts often assume that gender and youth integration is solely the responsibility of gender and youth experts. However, the role of gender and youth experts is to guide the integration of these factors across all interventions. These misaligned expectations prevent the meaningful integration of gender in youth across a program or activity. Thirdly, Gaia found that technical sector experts have knowledge gaps regarding key gender and youth concepts. While technical leads reported that their program teams understood some gender concepts, it was noted that significant knowledge gaps remained around some concepts. In particular, technical experts do not have sufficient knowledge on social inclusion domains, intersectionality, and the gender integration continuum, and positive youth development. Finally, on program teams, men had more positive perceptions regarding progress made to confront gender inequality compared to women. This finding suggests men who have a more privileged gender status perceive there to have been more progress made in advancing gender equality than there has been in reality. Thus, it is essential that cisgender male team members understand the extent to which gender inequality is a reality. To address these challenges, Gaia recommends that implementing partners elevate the importance of gender in youth for all team members. For example, this could involve helping technical sector leads understand the importance of gender and youth integration to achieving their sectoral outcomes. Another way to elevate the importance of gender and youth is to provide sector-specific gender and youth integration strategies for each technical area outside of gender and youth, such as food security, WASH, and agriculture. Prioritizing and highlighting gender and youth and meeting agendas and reports by putting these sections towards the beginning can provide needed space for robust updates. Also, including gender and youth-focused staff positions in the program's senior leadership team can help ensure that their insights are heard from a position of authority. These are some of the recommendations you'll find in the evidence brief, which includes resources on how to support the implementation of these recommendations. Gaia also recommends allocating time and resources to strengthening staff capacity around gender and youth integration. One example of this might be incorporating specific gender and youth competencies into position descriptions for all team members and using these as part of the recruitment and performance evaluation. Gaia also recommends using social behavior change approaches to influence the attitudes and practices of team members around gender and youth integration. But we'll talk about that more in just a bit. It's also important to ensure there are safe opportunities for women and members of sexual and gender minorities to share their experiences of inequality during internal training, should they choose to do so. One respondent recommended that implementing partners should follow this with ample time for reflection from colleagues. Finally, implementers should consider collaborating across partners to establish cross-partner training or working groups around gender and youth. We know that so many implementing partners have experience putting these recommendations into practice. So now I'm going to turn it over to our colleague, Solomon Girma, to speak more about his experience in listing senior leadership and technical sector experts as positive youth development and gender equality champions. Solomon is the Youth Employment and Income Generating Activity Advisor with CARE on the USAID BHA-funded SPEAR 2 Resilience Food Security activity in Ethiopia. Solomon is a youth empowerment and positive youth development expert with 13 years of experience. Solomon, over to you.
Dear participants, as you heard in the introduction, I'm Solomon Girma, Youth Employment and IG Advisor in the SPEAR 2 program. I'm really excited to present to everyone today on my experience mainly related to the Gaia assessment findings, specifically recommendation number 1, that is enlist senior management and a range of technical sector leads as champions of PYD and gender equality. In my current project, that is the RFSA project, we made great efforts to enlist technical and senior management staffs in developing integration matrix, which allow various teams, including management teams, to see the level of integration and collaboration, especially in the gender and youth activities across various purposes. The integration matrix uses as a roadmap and a point of collaboration corners so that it engages both the technical and senior management staffs to make better decisions on gender and youth issues. As you have been in the research and innovation period in our project, we had various discussions with the senior management team to let them know the best possible youth and gender strategies and get their involvement. The close discussion helped us to get management involvement to implement youth and gender activities in our project. When we hire new staffs as a team, we assess the level of know-how about the gender and youth in addition to the subject matter and try to familiarize with such concepts. All these approaches helped the SPEAR or RIFSA team to engage both the technical and senior management team in the gender and youth sectors, so that recently it enabled us to conduct gender analysis and to do soft skill manual activities. In my another experience, as a team, we, the gender and youth team, have conducted a simple mini assessment among our technical staff, including senior management team and multi-stakeholders, to check their know-how and their experience on gender and youth issues as a first step or baseline. The assessment that we had conducted was for the internal purpose. We have had various levels of experience with our teams, and that some of staff members are obviously more experienced than others in this respect. However, our assessment findings showed that there was a gap in understanding the issue of gender and youth, and some of them have no direct experience with gender and youth program implementations. To narrow the gap, what we did is, besides to several efforts we made, we also designed gender and youth integration strategies across all the purposes. As a result of all those efforts, we really brought tangible change in our youth project activity to evolve from tokenism or traditional youth services to a more integrated PYD approach. We used USAID PYD manual in that project. To ensure the sustainability of the project, we also made sure that every new hire that joined the program would receive capacity building around gender and youth as they start working on the program in one hand and engage the government people or staffs in our project implementation in the other hand. Based on my personal knowledge and experience, I know USAID encourages and promotes the PYD approach in all youth and gender-related programs, especially in the USAID-funded youth programs. The positive youth development approach really encourages the involvement of senior management teams and others throughout the process. Unfortunately, there are only few organizations use such PYD approach in their youth programs. Currently, most NGOs and government organizations stuck with the traditional youth services that make the target youth as recipient. As you all know that most organizations conduct gender analysis at the beginning of every project, but not PYD assessment among their own staff and stakeholders or partners. Dears, it is also needed to conduct youth barrier analysis as well. As an expert in this sector, I want to encourage and suggest every organization and expertise 3 major points just to make sure the engagement of senior management and senior technical staffs and a government partner in the gender and youth issues in a meaningful way, and to promote PYD approaches in their youth programs. And finally, I strongly encourage everyone to conduct a PYD mini assessment among their staffs and partners, like the gender assessment they do, and take necessary supports for their team. Thank you. This was my experience regarding the gender and youth related to the Gaia assessment number 1. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Solomon. We really loved hearing the highlights about the importance of measuring our own staff's knowledge of gender and youth integration so that you can really offer them tailored training and support. We really appreciate you sharing that. Solomon will be in the background answering questions on the chat. If you do have questions for Solomon, please feel free to put your questions in the chat for him. So now that we've heard from Solomon, we'd love to take a moment to hear from you all on a quick poll. So we'd love to know from the list of recommendations that we just covered, which recommendations do you need more guidance or support to try them for the first time or to strengthen your approach? So maybe you're already doing something around that recommendation and you'd love to strengthen your approach. So I'll read out the 4 different options. So which of these 4 recommendations do you need more guidance or support to try them for the first time or to strengthen your approach? So number 1 is the recommendation to provide sector-specific gender and youth integration. Number 2 is the recommendation to incorporate gender and youth competencies into position descriptions. Number 3 is the recommendation to use social behavior change approaches to influence team members. And number 4 is to establish the recommendation to establish cross-partner training or working groups around gender and youth. So I'm seeing the responses come in. Please do continue to respond to the poll. It looks like the kind of clear call outs for additional support or guidance to help strengthen approaches is around providing sector-specific gender and youth integration strategies, and as well as using social behavior change approaches to influence team members, in addition to establishing cross-partner training or working groups. So thank you so much all for taking the time to respond to that poll. These polls that you'll be answering throughout are helpful to help Gaia understand of where to guide some of our work next. So thank you for your contributions. And again, I think we've resulted with the clear winners being recommendation 1, 3, and 4.
Thanks, Julie, for taking us through that poll. The need for social behavior change was another key finding of Gaia's research. Incorporating social behavior change approaches allows teams to identify various barriers to gender equality and to design tailored interventions to address those barriers. However, our research showed that programs did not always identify and address barriers constraining behavior change. In some contexts, personal beliefs and attitudes can be the key element constraining behavior change. However, behavioral determinants or the things affecting a behavior are often more complex. To illustrate this, I'll give you an example. On the right side of the screen, you'll see our example behavior that women aged 15 to 45 perform the majority of household chores. If I am a woman aged 15 to 45 performing the majority of the household chores, there's likely a range of different factors causing me to do this. For example, as you'll see on the top left box, I might personally believe or have the attitude that women should be responsible for the majority of household chores. That attitude I have can be reinforced by a social norm where I perceive that my mother-in-law expects me to perform the majority of household chores. Knowledge and environmental or institutional factors can also play a role. For example, my husband might lack the knowledge to perform household chores like cooking. Maybe he's never cooked before. Or radio programming might be reinforcing traditional divisions of labor in and outside of the home. A program that tries to shift only individual beliefs or attitudes when there are potentially all of these other factors at play can ultimately fail to shift behavior. Thus, our second recommendation is to incorporate social behavior change approaches to identify and address barriers to gender equality and positive youth development. To fully implement social behavior change approaches, it is key to answer the following questions so that you can effectively design your activities. Why is the behavior happening? What factors enable or constrain the behavior? Who do we need to reach to change the behavior? And how can we design activities and measure for success? To implement a true social behavior change approach, first, programs must identify the behaviors they wish to change and the factors that affect those behaviors. During the program planning phase, programs can conduct primary or secondary research to identify what gender equality or positive youth development behaviors they wish to change or amplify, as well as a full array of behavioral determinants that can enable or prevent the adoption of these behaviors. This includes answering the questions I listed on the previous slide. After identifying these key elements, programs can design activities to address barriers. When adapting or planning for activities that specifically aim to shift the factors constraining gender equality or positive youth development behaviors in the program's context, programs can specifically engage men, others with relative privilege, and power holders who have the ability to reduce harmful practices. Lastly, programs need to measure for impact to understand if the program is achieving its objectives, setting realistic timelines, and building in space for adaptation, especially as these kinds of changes can take years of sustained activity and might not be visible through traditional measurement methods. You may be wondering what all of this looks like in practice. To share a practical example, I want to turn it over to our colleague, Unity, who is going to speak more about Takunda's use of social behavior change approaches to promote women and youth participation in village savings and loan associations. Unity Kashora is a Village Savings and Loan Association's technical specialist for Takunda, a USAID BHA-funded resilience food security activity implemented by CARE and other partners in Zimbabwe. Unity, over to you.
Thank you, Emily. So I'm going to speak to recommendation 2 which is incorporate social behavior change approaches to identify and address barriers to gender equality and positive youth development. Through a series of consultations and considerations, Takunda prioritized the following behavior to promote women and youth participation in village savings and loan associations as a way of providing them income to start viable income generating activities. So the specific behavior is men, women, youth apply financial skills and business development services to engage in profitable on-off non-farm income generating activities. From the social behavior change formative research and gender analysis conducted during the program's Refine and Implement year, we identified some barriers to women and youth's participation in income generating activities. Several barriers that include women being confined to the home doing domestic and household chores without enough time to engage in meaningful economic activities. So in order to address these barriers systematically while promoting the prioritized behavior, Takunda is using social analysis and action approach, which is a community-led social norm change tool through which individuals explore and challenge gender social norms, beliefs, and practices that impact on Takunda project outcomes that include nutrition and income security. In Takunda, the social analysis action is integrated in various platforms, including the Village Savings and Loans Associations. Village Savings and Loans Association are self-formed groups where participants come together, save money, lend that money to members at an agreed interest rate. The money is then used to invest in productive assets like small livestock and machinery. And through VSLA, participants also receive financial literacy training, business development and entrepreneurship training so that the loans they get from the Village Savings and Loans Associations are then invested in profitable income generating activities for increased household income. Social analysis and action has helped Takunda to challenge the restrictive gender norms that I have mentioned above through facilitating community members to act together to create more equitable gender norms as well as to support household food, nutrition, and income security. Guided by the approach, Takunda has followed a 5-stage process of social analysis and action. The first step is to transform staff capacity, where Takunda started off by training staff on social analysis and action so that the staff go through a critical process of self-reflection and dialogue, which begins with them and encouraging them to reflect on their own gender biases and beliefs and how this may affect their work in Takunda. Additionally, the training also helped in building capacity of staff to be comfortable to facilitate reflective gender dialogues with communities. The second step is to reflect with communities, where Takunda has led SAR reflections with communities and helping them to collectively identify and challenge gender norms that impact on project outcomes, including time poverty for women, limited decision-making for women and youth. And through these reflections, communities are able to envision alternatives and enact gender equitable norms that support the behaviors Takunda is promoting. The third step is to plan for action, where we realize that development of community action plans is of paramount importance to ensure that the participants are supported to individually and collectively address gender social norms and barriers. This is being done comprehensively with the timeline and assigning each other responsibilities and discussing support needed and where to get the support. The fourth step is to implement plans where the agreed actions are then implemented using food, project, and community resources to achieve greater social equality. The fifth step is to evaluate, where Takunda is promoting community-led evaluation of change in individuals, groups, and structures in social norms. This is done periodically. Currently, Takunda has started to document some shifts in social norms where we are seeing women having increased control of assets, women doing income generating activities, spouses support their women, their women to participate in businesses and IGAs, and also youth raising their voice in decision-making platforms. This is achieved through use of various monitoring and evaluation tools that include outcome mapping, qualitative inquiry sheets, and population-based outcome surveys. So in conclusion, I would encourage other implementing partners to also consider using social behavior change strategies that allow for community-owned change process. Takunda has witnessed men, women, and young men standing up and taking action to challenge discriminatory gender norms that impact on their lives. This has facilitated the easier adoption of behaviors being promoted in Takunda. Thank you.
Thank you, Unity, so much for sharing. That's a great example of using the social analysis and action approach to really challenge those restrictive gender norms around income generation. Now, I know that many of you work on programs that have tried to implement good social behavior change components. So Gaia would really love to hear from you all in a quick chat storm. I just want to continue to encourage questions in the chat. Thank you for your question, Joanna. It's a challenge that many partners face. We want to invite others who do have responses, in addition to what Gaia might contribute, but others who have responses to your colleagues who are asking in the chat different specific questions. Johanna's was specifically on how do you really drive behavior change with partners. So welcome others to contribute in the chat as well. But because we all work on programs that are really trying to implement good social behavior change components, we want to do a quick chat storm to hear from you all. So if you've joined a Gaia webinar before, you are probably familiar with this. But if this is your first time to join a Gaia webinar, this is how the chat storm works. So in a moment, I'm going to pose a specific question, and my colleague is going to play some music after I pose that question to allow everybody to think of their answer. And it will be then everybody's job to type their answer into the chat while that music is playing. The key here is do not press send until the music stops. Once the music stops, I'll ask that everybody at that time press send, and then we'll storm the chat with responses. So let's do a quick chat storm. The question that we're going to storm the chat with is, what barriers have you faced in the design, implementation, and measurement of social behavior change approaches? Again, we'll play some music to allow everybody to think of their answer while you type it into the chat, but do not press send until the music stops and we can all storm the chat with our responses at the same time. So again, one more time before the music starts. The question is, what barriers have you faced in the design, implementation, and measurement of social behavior change approaches in your work? So everybody storm the chat with your responses. And again, this is responding to the question of what barriers have you and your teams faced in the design, implementation, and measurement of social behavior change approaches. I definitely see budget being a barrier, really having the budget for SBCC staff and making sure there is senior management buy-in to that. So I see definitely negative pressure for influencing people like mother-in-laws or peers. So that negative pressure is another hard one to really drive social behavior change around if they aren't necessarily your direct participants. So that community level ownership, yes, yes. I'm just reading some of these, sorry. So that level of complex analysis needed to really dig in and do the social behavior change work has budgetary constraints to it potentially, or budgetary implications. Yeah, so just like gender and youth norms, that social behavior change piece really does have to be a shared responsibility across that. So I'm seeing, Joanna, I'm really highlighting, getting that across staff, that level of understanding, making sure there's budgets, again, staff dedicated to these things. All the stakeholders, right? So the stakeholders are a lot of who you're trying to drive that behavior change with, getting them to be a part of activities and involved in activities. Again, time and resource. We've got a lot of themes around time constraints and resource constraints. Data and evidence around best practices. So that's a great one to offer. I'd love to invite SBC experts who are on the call, because I know you're out there, to feel welcome to put resources into the chat if you have resources that you feel particularly strong about. That program staff ownership, again, America, thank you. That is really one of these strong themes. Like if we're going to do this, that program staff ownership has to be there. And really getting the participants at the table, getting the stakeholders at the table. This is another challenge you all are highlighting. Thank you all for your responses in the chat storm. We really, really appreciate you sharing your thoughts with us. I'm going to pass back over to Emily one more time to take us through the next finding and recommendation. Emily, over to you.
Thanks, Julie, and thank you everyone for participating in the chat storm. The last recommendation from our research is to systematically utilize disaggregated qualitative and quantitative data to inform program adaptations. A growing body of evidence suggests that evidence-based learning and adaptation improves both organizational success and the success of programs. Through our research, Gaia identified 2 key barriers preventing implementing partners from turning data on gender and youth into learning and adaptation. One of these key barriers is that implementing partners collect data on gender and youth age groups, but do not necessarily use their data to fully inform program activities. While 70% of survey respondents reported conducting routine gender analysis in program planning, only 27% of respondents use their gender analyses regularly. This suggests that while gender analyses are being conducted, the findings are not always used and fed back into programming. Furthermore, 30% of survey respondents reported that program design and implementation was not informed by the situation of youth in the local context. And 18% of respondents said gender equality data was not taken into consideration. Even when implementing partners collect enough data to be able to disaggregate it, Gaia found that programs are not necessarily using disaggregated analysis to inform program adaptations especially with regard to frequently excluded groups. Another key barrier is that implementing partners are collecting quantitative data, but lack the necessary qualitative research indicators and experience to evaluate the effectiveness of their programs and to understand the gender and youth context. Implementing partners reported that quantitative indicators do not fully demonstrate project results, as it is difficult to measure change around gender equality and positive youth development through quantitative indicators alone. They also reported that they do not have the qualitative indicators to measure and track gender and youth impact. To address these challenges, Gaia recommends incorporating gender and youth analyses into action planning. Gaia recommends that every program, including emergency programs, conduct or prepare a gender and/or youth analysis or assessment based on secondary data if it exists and primary data if gaps remain. Programs can then develop a gender and/or youth action plan based on analysis findings. To make an action plan a reality, programs should try to ensure that gender and/or youth action plans are integrated back into the program's primary work plan. Once the action plan is developed, Gaia encourages programs to regularly update the analysis and the accompanying gender or youth action plans based on monitoring, evaluation, and learning data. This will ensure that the action plan stays relevant and that teams are continuing to be responsive to new information and learning around gender and youth. Gaia also recommends that implementing partners reflect on data to inform adaptive management. The first step in this process is to develop clear indicators to assess the impact of gender and youth integration. Programs can start with or adapt existing standard indicators, or they can develop custom qualitative indicators to more deeply explore the impact of gender and youth integration. Once again, I'll direct you to the evidence brief for more resources on how to do this. Once indicators are selected and you begin collecting data, it is key to disaggregate data by gender, age, and other relevant factors, such as disability, caste, sexuality, location, ethnicity, and religion, and then to analyze differences between disaggregated categories to understand to what extent groups are being included and are experiencing the program's desired outcomes equitably. Teams can then aim to hold quarterly meetings to reflect on disaggregated data to inform action planning. Team members in all job positions can participate by identifying reflections from the past quarter pertaining to gender and youth. Realizations from these reflections can be fed back into gender and youth action plans and the program's overall work plan, along with adapted activity designs. To give an example of what this looks like in action, I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues, Agnes Achila and Rodwell Simbanda, to speak more about their experience from New York, a USAID BHA-funded resilience food security activity implemented by Catholic Relief Services in Uganda. Agnes is the gender program manager and Rodwell is the monitoring, evaluation, accountability, and learning specialist. Agnes has worked with New York for over 4 years, and Rodwell has 20 years of experience in monitoring and evaluation. Rodwell and Agnes, over to you.
Thank you very much, Emily. As already introduced, I'm going to straight away talk about the program and how we've used the data. New York is a USAID Bureau of Humanitarian Assistance funded activity in Karamoja, Uganda, led by Catholic Relief Services in a consortium of 6 implementing partners. For more information about New York activity, kindly look at the link at the chat and then you get more information. To promote equity and support reduction in harmful traditional practices, New York implemented a male change agent approach as a cross-cutting transformational gender strategy. We identified 3 male change agents per village, and each male change agent was to work or influence 5 more male, as known as peers, to promote positive gender norms such as joint decision-making, shared roles and responsibilities, and power among the couples in the household. How New York used data to inform program adaptations. Initially, New York implemented a faithful household approach, which is a CRS approach, which focused on married couples to drive positive change on gender. This approach was a very good approach, although it came with some limitations, as it did not consider polygamy and the low literacy levels among women in the Karamoja region, where the program was implemented. The faithful household curriculum was supposed to be delivered by a couple, which was also already difficult because given the literacy levels, it was difficult to find couples to facilitate this activity. So after a few months of implementation, like 3 to 6 months, New York used the quantitative results of the final evaluations of the development food security activities, that was the resilience through wealth, agriculture and nutrition, growth, health and governance activity that were previously implemented in Karamoja region. And the findings were that 70% of the male change agents participated in caring for their children under the age of 5, compared to the 17 of other men who did not participate in the project. Besides that, the headline of these activities, New York conducted a gender analysis, and the results of the gender analysis recommended that New York should use male change agent approach to promote gender equity, and also include adolescent boys among the male change agents to promote positive gender norms. Besides that, CRS, together with the consortium partners of New York, met to discuss the findings, and a decision was made or reached to implement the male change agent approach. After implementing about 2 years, we conducted a midterm evaluation, and the midterm evaluation was conducted in March 2022, and the findings showed very positive changes in the gender awareness, attitudes and roles among couples, and that made a decision to shift all the resources from other interventions like community influencers and women leadership empowerment to focus more resources on the male change agent approach, because it was really something which was seen working in the community. And also a separate assessment was also conducted to ascertain the impact of promoting joint decisions among the households. And that's why 50 MCAs who participated in the study reported making joint decisions on income, yet before they did not do that. And also the 69 spouses reported making joint decisions compared to the 19 who shared decisions before the intervention. Over to Rodwell to share with us the learnings through the process.
Thank you very much, Agnes, for the introduction. I'm going to talk about what we learned through the process. It is important for us to have timely dissemination of assessment results so that for making programmatic decisions. New York partners held a joint meeting to share the findings from the gender analysis, the end line of the GHG and run evaluations, and from there we made programmatic changes. It is important to make evidence-based decisions using data to make programmatic changes for acceptability by the donors as well as other humanitarian actors. Adapting approaches based on evidence to address specific issues also helps in the realization of the project outcomes. In selecting male change agents, it is important to get them from the local community structures so that the project is sustainable rather than importing them from a different area or from a different district. The evidence that we got from the different evaluations showed that we needed to allocate more resources for gender activities. One of the adaptations that we did was to increase the number of male change agents as well as adding their spouses, and this required additional resources. It is also important to scale down other gender approaches so that you reduce confusion. New York had to scale down other approaches like women leadership and community influencers activities so that the communities will be focused on one approach. The MCA approach has been shown to be effective in the Karamoja region. However, for you to adopt it to your own context, it is good to use evidence from lessons or from evaluations and other studies in your area to make it more effective. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Agnes and Rodwell, for that amazing example. And really letting us know how you switch to a different approach after reflecting on the data, right? This is a great example of using data for adaptive management. And I know many of you might have examples that are either similar to this or other ways you can use for data for adaptive management, right? Really bringing in that understanding, reflecting it on a regular basis. I just wanted to acknowledge what's happening in the chat. Really appreciate you all being in dialogue with each other and sharing resources. When you share resources, make sure that they're shareable outside of your organization. I think one of those saved resources might be only shareable to internal. So thank you, Nicole, for that. If you were able to share an externally available link, that would be awesome. I'm seeing that disability inclusion is coming up. This is great. Please bring these questions up. Specifically, I'm seeing that around resources connected to disability inclusion, ones around working with caregivers that are homebound and really how do you access them. So please keep on chatting and engaging with each other in the chat. So this conversation with Agnes and Rodwell, really around adaptive management and the use of data, prompted a lot of reflection for me specifically, and continues to, the original data continues to prompt that reflection. So this is the opportunity to really hear from you all. We've got another poll that we'd love for you to answer the question, for which of the recommendations do you need more guidance or support to try them for the first time or strengthen your approach, right? So these, again, coming back to these specific pieces of the guidance. So is it conduct or prepare a gender and youth analysis or assessment? Is it develop a gender and youth action plan? Is it number 3, developing clear quantitative and qualitative indicators? Or is it number 4, analyzing data and difference between disaggregated categories, right? Which of these, again, going back to that question of where do you need more recommendations, guidance, support to try these for the first time or to strengthen them, specifically related to data, right? So around number 1, gender and youth analysis or assessments. Number 2, developing gender and youth action plans. Number 3, developing clear quantitative and qualitative indicators. Or number 4, analysis to analyze that data and difference between disaggregated categories. So love to hear the responses. We've got clear ahead winners on the responses so far around developing quantitative and qualitative indicators. This is a key one, right? If you've got an action plan, you've got to be able to measure it. What are those really good measurements that's going to get us an understanding so that we can have those adaptive management conversations? So it makes sense that that is a clear winner in your responses so far and continues to be a clear winner, developing that clear quantitative and qualitative indicators. Although the gender and youth action planning, right, and developing one that is really usable is also showing up quite strongly in this poll. So thank you so much for continuing to respond to that. It looks like we are slowing down in our responses to the poll. And so we really appreciate your continued engagement in these polls, these chat storms, these questions. Again, this is to share with your colleagues online, really immediate real-time reflection on the documents and products the Gaia team is sharing with you. But this is also for the Gaia team to understand where need continues to be, right? Specifically with implementing partners, so that we can take that into account with our work as a learning activity to really drive learning in this space. Thank you for resharing documents and continuing to ask each other questions. Really appreciate you all's engagement in this. So I know we've covered a lot of information during today's webinar, and you might be wondering, how can I actually implement all of this? Well, my colleague is once again going to share a link in the chat to our publication that outlines all of these recommendations, as well as related resources. And I'd like to take a moment to encourage everyone to open up this link, bookmark the page, so that you know where it is and you can go to it and use it as your need dictates. We hope you find this resource useful. The resources that we've compiled there are a lot of them, and that you will share these resources with your colleagues. So as a reminder, we have versions of this particular resource available in Arabic, French, Spanish, Amharic, Oromo, and Bengali, which were the languages that the actual survey was conducted in. So we are trying to mirror that accessibility. You will also receive this link as a part of the follow-up email from us later on this week for attending the webinar, so that you will have that as well if you aren't able to bookmark it right now. Thank you, Delilah, for sharing the report as well. Continue, please, to share resources with your colleagues in the chat. We really, really appreciate it. So to close, or actually, I want to hand this over to Hope Shaken. And we won't show you this graphic recording yet, although I'm really excited to do it. It looks like we have a bit of time in our schedule that's going to allow us to have maybe a deeper conversation and elicit some of your questions around these different recommendations. So I'm going to turn it over to Hope to lead that conversation. Hope, over to you.
Thanks so much, Julie. So I'm going to take this opportunity to walk us through the guidance note quite quickly, but also while we're walking through, would encourage people to continue putting questions in the chat. And as you have been, where you have answers to the questions in the chat, feel free to respond to your colleagues. This is an opportunity for us to problem solve together. And so if there are questions you have for your colleagues, don't hesitate to put them in, and also don't hesitate to respond. So this is our webpage. If you click the link that my colleague Katie put in the chat, this is where it will take you. As you can see in that little teal box, this resource is accessible in various languages. If you're interested in the English version, you can go to the right and click Download Gender and Youth Insights, and that will take you to our resource. So Katie is bringing it up now. First, we have our title page, but the real first page of text is an overview that briefly summarizes for those of us with limited time, the 3 recommendations that my colleague Emily and our fabulous implementing partners spoke to today. Those links are clickable. And so if you click on recommendation 1, it will take you immediately to that recommendation 1 page. As I said at the beginning of this call, each section is organized in 3 parts. So first we have insights from the IP survey, and Emily presented some of those findings, what our survey showed, what we found through doing that IP survey and qualitative research that I spoke to earlier. After the insights section, we have integration and implementation, where we provide really actionable recommendations along with links to resources where we have them and call outs to submit resources where we don't have them. So if you're interested in reading more, if you're interested in learning from other people who have tried these recommendations or looking for a framework or a place to start, those links are available to you. I'm going to skip ahead. I'm not going to go through recommendations 2 and 3, though they're obviously organized in a similar way to recommendation 1. But I'm going to skip ahead to the additional information section, which just provides a little background on what Gaia is and what the research we did was. And then at the end of the document, you'll find a list of key terms and concepts. So if you're seeing a term for the first time, you're not quite sure what it means, we have all those key terms and concepts there, along with where we pulled definitions from or adapted definitions from. And then the guidance note concludes with additional resources. So we didn't want to put too many links in the earlier sessions to crowd it, but we did want to make sure you had access to all the resources that we would recommend or that implementing partners recommended to us to include in this document. So it's not just the 3 recommendations and the insights, actions, and resources you can take, but also all of these additional resources as well. So thanks for letting me walk you through that. I'm going to pop over to the chat now and see questions that we have, if any. We've got, sorry, just scrolling through. Thank you, Delilah, for putting in the review of social and behavior change methods and approaches within Food for Peace DIFSA activities report. Really helpful to add there. Then we also have from Nicole a 2-pager that provides a high-level overview of the community action cycle, including a scorecard and partnership-defined quality and the use of a community bulletin board, and also guidance on supporting communities for behavior change during COVID-19. So thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Delilah, for those resources and for everyone who's contributed to the chat so far. And see one more coming in for Nicole. So I don't see any additional questions in the chat at this moment. So I'm going to pass it back over to Julie to do the final unveiling of our fabulous graphic recording. Thanks, Julie.
So I'm very excited to show the graphic recording that Lisa from ThinkLink Graphics has been working on in the background. We've got it coming up here. I want to take a moment to actually thank Lisa from ThinkLink Graphics for this incredible visual representation of all of these incredible insights from this community today. Again, we're going to share this with everyone in the follow-up email, but wanted to give you a quick view of this graphic representations. So really highlighting these key recommendations that we've been talking about and some of the key strategies from implementing partners that have come out, right? So we've got with the positive youth development piece and with the social behavior change piece, really those main questions of why, what, where, how, right? How do we get there? Really the examples from the chat that are coming up of like, these are the challenges, like how do we allocate resources? How do we really measure in the ways that we need to? How do we get the stakeholders that we need to the table, right? These are all things that are being pulled up. So this is really a combination of what you've been hearing, what you've been seeing in the PowerPoint, and what has come out in the chat that's going to be represented in this graphic. So again, so much thank you from Lisa, or for Lisa from ThinkLink Graphics for this incredible visual representation, and you will all have access to this. Again, we were seeing this as another way to create a tool out of this engagement with you, right? So very quickly to have a visual representation of a meaningful conversation that you can take back and utilize as you will within your work, right? This could be a tool to bring people to the table, have a conversation with the leadership, right? We don't all learn by reading a big report. We do need shorter, smaller things to get people to the table. And as we know, getting that leadership to the table and getting their buy-in is a huge piece of what we need to do. So excited about this. So excited that social behavior change is really coming to the forefront. Really appreciate this, Lisa. It's a beautiful graphic representation of our conversation today. So I want to do a little bit of closing survey with you all. As Hope mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, the research presented today was largely based on a survey Gaia conducted last year on implementers' knowledge, attitude, and practice regarding gender and youth integration. We received overwhelmingly support for keeping the implementing partner survey open. So partners can continue to reflect and learn. So that means that we have kept that survey link open and available online if you would like to continue to drive your teams to take this survey, to really have that snapshot of where your teams are at right now in order to really start
Hi, Julie. Sorry to pop off. I think you got muted somehow.
Apologies. I was just speaking to that the survey link from the survey that this data is coming out of continues to stay live based on feedback we got from all of you, and that survey you were able to drive your teams to so that they can take that survey so that you can get snapshots of where your teams are at, whether that be globally, at a country level, at a programmatic level. So you can complete that survey, and it's just the quantitative part of the survey, not the qualitative. So when you do get your team to complete this survey, Gaia is able to share that data back with you in order to promote that learning. That data is raw data with identifiers taken out of it so that it can remain anonymous for team members. We will not be doing a full analysis of that data for you, but we can give that data back to you so that you can do that analysis for yourself. So we are almost at time, but before we let you go, we want to take a quick moment to hear from you on how accessible this event was for you and how could we actually increase the accessibility. You'll notice throughout the call that we are just trying to describe things, speak things out. We experiment with date, time, combinations. So please we do take this feedback seriously. We do adapt based on this feedback. So please do take the time to respond. So our first question is, how difficult or easy is it for you or your colleagues to participate in this event based on timing, technology, language, etc.? So the options are A, it was very difficult. B, it was somewhat difficult. C, it's not applicable for me. D, it was somewhat easy. And E, it was very easy. And if you can explain the somewhat easy in the chat, we welcome the explanation of why it was somewhat easy. Date, time, technology, etc. Please do feel welcome. So overwhelming, somewhat easy. So again, if you want to give us details about what were some of the challenges in that somewhat easy that could be adapted for future webinars, we would love to hear that, and you're welcome to put that in the chat. So we've got A second question for you, if you are able to answer this first one and stay online with us just a few more minutes, we've got just one more question for you around accessibility. So it looks like as many people as could have answered so far. So I want to take us to our second question. So our second question is, what about this event should have been changed to make it easier to participate? So the options are, again, date, day of the week, time of the webinar, technology, language, lack of accommodation for different abilities, such as hearing or sight challenged folks. It's not applicable or other. So that's the second question, the second poll question. What about this event could have been changed to make it easier to participate? A, the date, B, the day of the week, C, the time of the webinar, D, the technology, E, the language, F, the lack of accommodation for different abilities such as hearing or sight challenged folks, G, it's not applicable, or H, others. And we really, again, appreciate your feedback. We do take, as you see in the graphic representation, when we do polls, when we do chat storms, we do take that information seriously. We are not asking it willy-nilly. That is information we take back and we adapt for in the future. So I just wanted to take this final moment to say a huge thank you to our team for the great work that you did this morning, but more importantly, a huge thank you to all of you from our team. We will be keeping the Zoom meeting open and play some music in the background as you finalize the survey. Feel free to leave whenever you'd like. We really, really appreciate your time and energy this morning and your engagement in the chat. We love engaging with you and hearing from you and learning from you. Keep your eyes open for things coming out of Gaia in the future. And we hope the tools and resources that we're sharing out with you are useful. And we'd love to continue to hear from you. So feel free to reach out to us through the Gaia email and or other means that you have to connect with us. Thank you all again and have a great rest of your morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are. Thank you all.